I will talk about receptive ecumenism and cosmopolitan conflict resolution. Can receptive ecumenism play a part in peace-building processes? This question has accompanied me for a couple of years, and in this short presentation I will discuss it with a view to cosmopolitan conflict resolution. While receptive ecumenism has developed with regard to inter-church relations, I would still argue that it is worthwhile to explore the possible contribution of receptive ecumenism in the field of conflict resolution. And therefore this presentation means inquiring into the methodology of receptive ecumenism, since it has testified to bring relaxation to tense and even frozen relations. But what about cosmopolitan? Can receptive ecumenism, with its focus on the life of the churches, be connected to cosmopolitanism? I insist that if we explore precisely this connection, we will find elucidative answers to the question about the possible part of receptive ecumenism in peace-building processes. If we look at receptive ecumenism in relation to cosmopolitanism, we find an interesting common denominator, namely the approach to disagreements. The philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah points to how cosmopolitanism implies building communities that give space for diversity and multiple ways of thinking and believing. Cosmopolitanism involves seeing differences as a reason to learning and new discoveries. Appiah admits that conversations between different convictions can be both enriching and troublesome, and yet they are impossible to avoid in times of increasing mobility and communication. For that reason, Appiah points to the importance of paving the way for communities that do not presuppose agreement. Cosmopolitanism implies searching for ways of living together in the presence of disagreements, and therefore it is guided by the motto, agree to disagree. It is thought-provoking that in receptive ecumenism we find a similar approach, which comes forth through the search for a better quality disagreement. The philosopher Nicholas Adams explains that receptive ecumenism, with its roots in the interreligious methodology of scriptural reasoning, is based on the acknowledgement that different traditions privilege different authorities. Instead of seeing these authorities as competing or trying to find the lowest common denominator between them, the aim is to understand the other's arguments through learning more about the sources that she is leaning on. The fact that we should build our perspectives on different sources is not seen as a threat, but as a reason to deeper investigations. Paul D. Murray, who is here with us today, brings clarity to this approach by explaining that scriptural reasoning and receptive ecumenism present strategies for living with lasting friendship in contexts where different standpoints, beliefs, and worldviews exist side by side. These strategies involve learning from differences, not trying to overcome them. Adams continues by stating that here it is not a problem that different lines of reasoning are contrary to each other. This is simply seen as a fact. What is sought for is not agreement. To an ecumenist, this might in the first place appear surprising. If the goal of the ecumenical movement is Christian unity, is not agreement then a principal way to come closer to this goal? Since the emergence of the modern ecumenical movement about a century ago, strivings for agreeing or converging or even finding consensus have featured many endeavors. Considering the movement's development in the time of the two world wars, the Cold War, and the new wars of today, these strivings express a desire for building bridges between Christians of different traditions, nationalities, and cultures. However, in the light of cosmopolitan conflict resolution, the search for better quality disagreement that is visible in receptive ecumenism does not necessarily mean to deviate from this path, but rather to extend it. The peace and conflict researcher Oliver Ramsbottom, he points to how cosmopolitan conflict resolution includes precisely an extension to such traditional conflict resolution approaches that give way to agreement, commonality, and mutual understanding. This extension implies engaging radical disagreement. He argues that when conflicts are intractable and tend to freeze, conflict resolution needs to be substituted with such an engagement. Ramsbottom explains that strategies for attaining mutual agreement, co-creation, and a focus on common interests for long times have guided conflict resolution, many times with success. But at the same time, these strategies means to resolve opposed interests and to set radical disagreements aside. And in face of intractable conflicts, these approaches usually fail. This, says Ramsbottom, is due to that the time is not ripe. The situation is still premature to efforts towards agreement. In frozen conflicts, disagreements should not be ignored, but become a source of learning. We need to listen carefully to the linguistic intractability, which articulates the core of the conflict and can reveal what is dear, significant, and desirable for each party. However, according to Ramsbottom, an elaborated philosophy of radical disagreement is still conspicuous by its absence. This, he assumes, implies a missed opportunity. Receptive ecumenism evokes the question of whether theology today might catch this opportunity. Receptive ecumenism addresses frozen dialogues and provides a method designed for bringing the ecumenical movement out of the ecumenical winter. And a key to this endeavor is the readiness to learn from differences, even in situations of deep disagreement. As Ramsbottom writes, it is easy to estimate disagreements simply in terms of competitive debate, but disagreements can be a source for learning more deeply about what blocks the way for conflict resolution. Such a learning process does not disparage, but extends and may give new life to conflict resolution. Thus then, receptive ecumenism as a new current in the ecumenical movement extend and revitalize long-standing ecumenical strivings for agreement. Receptive ecumenism is elaborated in terms of a third phase strategy, based on the assumption that enduring ecumenical endeavors of life and work and faith and order need to be extended. Here, the image of a third faith might give the impression of a strategy that overrides previous and parallel endeavors. But simultaneously, as we have heard of already today, receptive ecumenism is referred to as a new name for old ways of thinking, a method which draws on long-standing ecumenical experience in order to bring new energy to endeavors for reaching the ecumenical goal of Christian unity. As such, it forms a future-oriented strategy designed for a situation that is still premature to efforts toward full agreement. It can be observed that receptive ecumenism, in likeness with cosmopolitan conflict resolution, accommodates a methodology framed by strategic thinking. Still, the aims and outcomes are partly different, since the terminology is used on different wavelengths. In receptive ecumenism, the concept of strategy does even seem to turn upside down. Here, the strategy involves displaying one's wounds, confessing one's false steps, and acknowledge one's need for help. To win means to be enriched by the other, an enrichment made possible through one's readiness to think self-critically and learn from differences. And I assume that it is here, in the seemingly upside-down appearance of strategic thinking, that we find key answers to the question about the possible part of receptive ecumenism in peace-building processes. Thank you.